Romance. The very thing that drives some players to be their specific goal when they enter a world crafted by their dungeon master, as they try to see, how can I seduce this princess, or more accurately, that dragon over there? And others, it fills them with dread, knowing they have to try and be a romantic kind of charismatic person, when they're not very good at it, and that Goliath over there who's shooting a few wings ain't exactly doing it for them. Romance in Dungeons & Dragons has always been an interesting subject for me, as throughout the fantasy land of clickety-clackers and min-maxing, it always caught my attention how many players and DMs handle romance in their own unique way. Today, I thought I'd share my experience as maybe something can help not only the players who are still uncomfortable about this subject, but dungeon masters who are trying to help expand and make romance a true aspect of the story into a whole new light, and bring them into the joy that can come from taking time to get invested in the world, and maybe even romancing that sweet dragon over there with the 12 heads. Please don't hurt me. Romance, like any other aspect of Dungeons & Dragons, is a player-driven story based around not only their choices, but the choices the NPC makes. When the Dungeon Master crafts this finely beautiful Cinnabon for the players to maybe fall in love with, there has to be a few choices in there, so that this NPC is not only just a person there to help just make that one player's story a little bit better, but to truly enhance the story itself. Let's give a few examples to try to help expand on this just a little bit in case understanding. Let's say this Cinnabon is a lawful good character, following a god that they make sure to show devotion to in every one of their actions. Now, let's say a player catches interest in this woman. What happens if this player is not lawful good? What if this player is actually evil? What if this player sees this character and doesn't have the same views or understanding that makes that NPC happy? This is where you can take the story element and shift it on its head and make it to where the NPC reacts to this. Make it to where the player can't just roll a few nat 20s and suddenly wham, they have the love of their life. That's not how romance truly blossoms in reality. I think that's where I find the differences that occur from game to game could be kind of interesting. For me, if you're going to romance someone, truly court someone to make them love you, they have to evolve with you. So as an example, I am now trying to romance the Cinnabon. She's lawful good, she wants the best in everything, and she shows devotion through her actions. But I'm a bad guy. My hobbies include setting everything on fire and throwing skulls at people who look at me funny. The moment that NPC hears about it, they're not going to sit there and go, oh, he's so dreamy, I just love him. No, they're going to stop and go, whoa, not for me. And that should help shape the story, for not only making the players think twice about the actions they're doing, but help the NPC kind of shift them. Or maybe the NPC shifted towards that way. That's kind of the beauty of this, is that these two dynamic interactions can shift either the player or the NPC for the better or the worse. Giving one of my favorite examples, in one of my recent games, there was an NPC named Ravani. Ravani was a high-level wizard who didn't really have much skill when it came to being an adventurer, and one of my players, named Valmar, had romantic interest for Ravani. Now, Valmar, when they first met, was a very kind individual who was always seeking his time to go spend with her, and both of them had that same passion for magic and studying it and exploring the world and just having a great time. But as the story expanded, Valmar became more of a dark-themed character, becoming more entwined with death and the forces of powerful magic that kind of questioned a lot of things and made Ravani try to intervene. Ravani went out of her way to talk to him, to try her best to sway him from the dark path. And hopefully, in her eyes, she did good. Unfortunately, the player succeeded enough deception rolls so that Ravani was caught left field with no idea what to do when Valmar delved further and further into his magic until he sold everything to become a powerful character. This made Ravani leave him because he was no longer the man that she fell in love with. He had changed, ignored her, and lied to her, and she left. And while that made my player upset that I would do something like that, all I could do was tell him, your character did this. Your character showed that he didn't care about her the way you thought he did. Your actions dictate what that player did. And when that occurs, it makes the player stop and reflect on it. Could I have done something different? Could I have saved that romance? And that helps make your world a more living place. Here's another example. One of my players, named Vess, had a very lengthy backstory. Vess was a pirate captain and had a lovely crew, and her first mate was named Thorvo. Thorvo Thorvo is the key NPC of the story because as her backstory was written, Thorvo was a very kind, loving man who is devoted to his wife. Vess, on the other hand, wasn't quite as faithful. She sought to gain power by any means, and as a bard that she was very persuasive with getting what she wanted. However, every time she would find the company of others to her own husband, it brought a shift and slowly started seeding the perfect story for betrayal. And this betrayal eventually came ahead when Vess went back to her crew and she was no longer welcomed. She was no longer the captain, the crew wouldn't follow her, and the person who was leading this rebellion was Thorvo. And the player was so broken on the inside because this NPC, who they thought loved them dearly, ended up being a bad guy for the plot itself, and the player was the only one at fault with this. These two aspects of how a NPC and a story shift can both make a story more interesting for the player as they stop and realize that romance and love is something that's not easily done. You have to think about it, be caring for the other person. And when you do that, it truly can bring the player into the world itself, bring them out of who they are maybe a little nervous to get into and help them become that character they crafted and brought to your table. Romance in Dungeons & Dragons isn't exactly an easy science to understand. It isn't just putting the blocks together and hoping that everything sits right up. It's complicated. Just like a plot that can be shaped by the players who do these crazy and magical things, and just like that, you can shift things out of place just enough and things can come crumbling down. These aspects can make everything better for the player and the dungeon master who want to expand and make Dungeons & Dragons truly a world worth investing in.